Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Debunking 7 Myths About AI and Performance Management. During this webinar, you'll be hearing from two incredible speakers. Be sure to stay tuned for an exciting announcement during the conclusion of this webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a couple of items so you know how to best participate in today's event. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available for on-demand viewing as well. We ask that you please submit any questions in the Q&A section on the right side of your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and the speakers will address them during the Q&A portion of the event. If you run into any technical issues, please submit your question in the Q&A or chat, and our team will help you troubleshoot. We've included a number of helpful resources here as well to help enhance your experience and provide more insight into Betterworks and our upcoming events. You can find those in the Docs tab of the platform. You'll also be receiving our feedback survey today. If you could please take a moment to complete the survey before leaving the platform, we'd greatly appreciate it, as this helps us shape future webinars. It's our mission and passion at Betterworks to help HR leaders put these principles into practice and realize the benefits of an engaged and productive workforce. Betterworks Intelligent Performance Management incorporates new generative AI capabilities that take the art of managing and make it a science that drives employee engagement and brings about organizational impact. In a broad-based study, it's shown that Betterworks' approach to enabling performance is helping employees with goal clarity and alignment. It's enabling managers to be more effective in their role as coaches and in performance reviews. And most important, it's helping employees perform better. So now, please help me welcome Betterworks' own John Schneider.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here, whether you're a veteran to the People Fundamentals series or a brand new comer to it as well. People Fundamentals is dedicated to empowering HR professionals such as yourself with the tools and knowledge to shape your workplace for the better. We believe in your ability to lead meaningful change by addressing the opportunities and issues you face today, and that's what we discuss in the People Fundamentals series. At the center of this challenge is the pace of change. The world around us is changing at breakneck speed. Workplace disruptions are all around us, such as generative AI, hybrid work, remote work, hiring booms, and workforce contractions. This all makes the unprecedented feel like the new normal to all of us. HR leaders successfully navigating these challenges and changes are returning to what we call people fundamentals. Fairness, support, growth opportunities, and balance are all things employees need. It's a business imperative to recognize and respect these fundamental aspects of our work because they're the one stabilizing factor for the workforce, despite all of the changes that can be occurring around them. Strategic HR leaders invest in people to drive change, innovation, and impact. And that brings us to today's topic. So it's been just 1 year, hard to believe, since ChatGPT took the world by storm. It is the fastest technology ever adopted to date. It may feel like there's a new AI company born every day. And if you thought there is, you're right. In fact, there's 100 new AI companies coming into the market every month. And so what does that mean to HR professionals? With all this hype, there's both excitement and anxiety. Questions like, will AI replace human judgment? What is the risk of introducing bias into workforce planning and decision-making? How does it impact jobs in HR? These are all questions that are circling around all of us today, and the media loves to grab them. There are important questions to answer because employees are already using generative AI technologies with or without approval. Study after study is showing that over 50% of respondents to these types of surveys are saying as employees are using generative AI in the workplace, and they're doing it with or without company approval. So today's webinar is about debunking the myths and focusing on the opportunity. We really believe HR has the ability to assert leadership as to how this technology makes a fundamental impact on the business. With that, we designed this event to bring together the unique perspective of a CEO and a talent leader because we believe fundamentally in the role of strategic HR leadership. With that, let's start by welcoming Doug Dennerline, CEO of Betterworks, author of the Make Work Better book, and a Silicon Valley veteran, former president of SuccessFactors, where he brought performance management to the cloud. And our guest, David Landman, recent and longstanding head of talent at Goldman Sachs, who brings 2 decades of experience and expertise in talent practices. And he played an absolutely pivotal role in developing the talent strategy for one of the most prestigious financial institutions in the world. So welcome, David, to joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I have this one question we ask everybody who joins People Fundamentals for the first time. Can you share with us one fun fact about yourself that we just can't glean from your LinkedIn profile?
So my one fun fact, which actually I added to my, certification section on LinkedIn, is that I recently became interested in freediving, and I got certified last summer by taking some courses, and I can hold my breath for 2.5 minutes and dive down over 40 feet. I say over because when I got to 40, it was pitch dark and I got really scared and decided to go back up.
That is intense. And welcome, Doug, as well.
Thanks, John.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and dive in here? We have 7 myths to go through, and we're going to talk about each one of them. First question up. This is a natural one to start with because it would be one of the most fearful ones. Will AI replace HR professionals?
You want me to go first, David?
Go for it.
The way I think about it is the greatest worry shouldn't be about AI replacing people, but people without AI skills being replaced by people with them. The other thing I think about, John, is people talk about AI making people in companies dramatically more productive, somewhere between 50 and 70%. And also the kind of work that they're doing on that 50 or 70% is more strategic. Is that as a CEO, my decision is, do I do that with 50% less people and achieve what I'm achieving today? Or do I achieve 50% more because I'm working on things that are more strategic and go that much faster than my competition? I would err on the second one, not replacing jobs, but going faster as a company in a world that's moving at a really fast pace.
And I would add to that, as an HR practitioner for over 20 years, and I think many people who are joining us are also HR practitioners who are probably experiencing the fact that we spend so much time doing administrative rote tasks that end up eating up our energy, but also our bandwidth to actually do what we all want to do as leaders, which is provide strategic advice to the business. So I think in addition to optimizing and creating more efficiencies in the workplace, and also starting to change people's jobs, I think we're going to actually have the bandwidth freed up such that we can do the job that we've always wanted to do around the strategic direction that we should be giving the business to enable their success.
Yeah, well said.
And that actually is the second question. So why don't we go lead to that around the question of rote or administrative tasks? Maybe we can go a little bit more into that. What types of tasks do you think are the ones that get replaced?
Well, John, we looking at our own research, we did a research in Betterworks where we got 1,000 people to respond to a survey asking them about the use of AI. And one of the things that we learned, and we asked this question, is that over 60% of the use of AI in companies is around strategic stuff like brainstorming and business planning. And so it's not just rote, it's doing things that are of much more relevance to an organization.
I think for anyone who has not tried it yet, when you just start to brainstorm with ChatGPT and see just the questions that it asks to help prompt creative thought, it's pretty incredible. So I am also excited, as Doug said, around the more strategic use of AI in terms of helping people think through problems and plan strategies and beyond. I am also excited about AI's ability to reduce the operational burden for simple yet complicated tasks. So if you just think about something like data analysis and the amount of time that we spend now mining data, looking for that needle in a haystack, let alone being able to more proactively identify trends and opportunities where we can intervene as people leaders, I think AI's ability to consume massive amounts of data and to help highlight for us the key and most important insights that we can then action. That's another area that I'm particularly interested in.
And we have a question that is building on this. So Michelle Duran asked the question, who can we trust to teach us about AI? How do we develop those skills?
Well, I would say just go out and start to experiment there with them. I literally have, for the last year, I have a window open with Bard, ChatGPT 3.5 and 4.0, Pi, Anthropic, called Claude. And I think if you just are using good common sense and not putting personal information out there that you wouldn't want anywhere, but experiment, learn how to write what they call good prompts, and that's how to ask AI good questions. You'll learn a lot from that.
So I recently heard somebody talking about the best users of AI, and they drew the parallel to delegation skills and talked about how people who have good delegation skills will have an easier time learning how to use AI because, Doug, you just said it, like good prompts equal good outputs. So I also learn by doing, I've been experimenting a lot, mostly with ChatGPT, and the paid version has a voice conversational piece to it. So I use my commuting time now, even my exercise time outdoors, having conversations with ChatGPT, experimenting with different directions where I can test its judgment, see what it's helpful for, see what it's not as helpful for. But also I asked ChatGPT to teach me about ChatGPT. Like just yesterday, when they put out that new release around creating your own GPT, I was trying to develop a writing coach. And I started by asking ChatGPT to help me think about what it can and cannot do and how I should train it. So I know there's a lot of great resources out there beyond what we're saying, but at least one element of experimentation and seeing for yourself, I think, is important for a technology, if I can call it that, that's as different as it is. Like this is really a new era for us. And I think people who get on board early and start to use it will just become more fluent and comfortable.
That's really interesting. And I think this gets to the third question you started to touch on. I think we started to touch on it there. We talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just being used for rote or administrative tasks, but actual strategic decision making. And then you talked, David, a little bit about the question of human judgment. So our third question was, or is, will AI replace human judgment?
And I believe AI will greatly augment human judgment. And again, like back to some experimentation, I have found, we all know that humans are fallible in many ways, including via our judgment. I have found AI to be a bit of an equalizer. So just as an example, it takes all the emotion out of things. And it also has been trained on, and will just get better and better, kind of the right outcomes in terms of how to navigate situations, strategies, conversations. I love experimenting. I have started to ask ChatGPT for judgment to help me navigate both personal and professional challenges. I have an idea of the direction of travel, and I might say, like, hey, this is what I think I should do. What do you think? But I believe that humans will always need to overlay their own judgment, but that AI will help to mitigate some of the things that actually cause us to have errors in our judgment, and also be a good sounding board to help us test things and get a different perspective, just like we do when we interact with humans.
John, you certainly know this. We at Betterworks are very heavily invested in using AI in HR processes around performance and talent. Because as you all know, as HR professionals, there's a lot of bias that shows up in the processes, and mostly recency bias. And so the way we think about AI in HR is it's got to be the co-pilot. It can't be the pilot. And you need to, and so what we're going to help you do if you use our product is we're going to help you write developmental feedback to give to someone that removes bias, that is professional, that you can actually ask what tone you want AI to provide the feedback to be. It can be stern, it can be exciting, it can be empathetic. and we're going to have that throughout our product. But the job of the person that uses it is to say, this actually represents what I want this person to hear from me and the reality of it, not just send it over and say, written by AI. That's not going to be, but by the way, a lot of the times what AI comes up with is good just like it is. It still needs to be reviewed by someone who's a human, if you want to put it that way.
David, anything to add?
I just want to pick up something that Doug just said. I mean, yes to everything that Doug just said, but the one thing I want to pick up that I think is interesting is around bias and judgment. And when you focus specifically on performance reviews and we start to hear concerns about bias, I mean, for sure, if we don't do a good job training AI, it may perpetuate the biases that currently exist. But how many of us who are involved in performance management in our organization have seen managers demonstrate terrible judgment and bias, either unintentionally, which I think is most often the case, or even intentionally? And I think it's so interesting how AI, Doug gave one example, like recency bias. AI can unemotionally and also in a fully informed way look across an entire time period of all the data that's available and help to precede ideas for managers to remind them to take a more holistic view of somebody's performance. As we're writing our own feedback, it'll be able to check and help us navigate through real-time coaching and remove some bias and actually give us better judgment in our in how we communicate to others, both feedback to that person's manager and also that manager communicating feedback to their teams. But I just think, like, coming back to, I always like to think of like what exists now. Like, what exists now is not an unbiased system. It's because human beings are inherently biased, and having something there, in this case AI, to help mitigate some of those biases and steer and nudge people in the right direction. And I think it's going to be a tremendous game changer.
A really important point, David, that probably people don't really realize is, again, this research we did said 54% of the people in companies are already using AI, whether or not John talked about this in the entrance, are using it whether a company wants them to or not. But what they don't realize is that they're out using ChatGPT or Bard, and that is in the open model, right? It's training this model that everybody is in that might have actually the wrong bias being trained. What we're doing inside of companies like our own is we're using a version of ChatGPT called Turbo, where we are training it just with the information that people talk about in HR. And so it's a private version of ChatGPT. And so you're not teaching it, because ChatGPT is learning all kinds of things, not just HR stuff. Well, our thing is just learning HR stuff. And so it's really learning how to give valuable feedback to people. And so I think HR people need to kind of realize they need to get their heads around it, because their companies are using it in the wild. And, some of the things that you get when you do something with us or others is it's a protected model of AI.
I heard something that made me smile last week. I was at a conference and somebody made a joke, but based on reality, about the fact that it's performance review season. And for some reason, everyone's performance reviews are a lot better, more well than they were last year. And it's because just like Doug said, like, people are figuring out they can ask ChatGPT kind of off the record, offline, to help write their performance reviews. But it's doing so, I mean, first of all, it's an obvious potential breach of data confidentiality and policy, but also ChatGPT is not trained in the leadership principles, the vernacular, the culture of the organization in which that person is operating. So the interesting thing that made me smile is people are starting to feel like the results, like what they're getting back from their manager, feels inauthentic, because it's so different than the language and, again, the culture and the principles in that organization. Which is why I think this idea of custom built models that operate within the four walls of your organization are interesting for a lot of reasons, including the ability to help create more authenticity and more authentic and better responses.
Yeah, well said.
I love that, David. And I think this leads to another this leads to a couple of comments that are in here I want to read, and then there's some questions streaming in too. Holly says, AI cannot create information or make decisions. AI uses vectors to analyze vast amounts of data, much faster than humans can, to identify patterns and trends. AI is only as good as the quantity and quality of the data available at the time. If you trust the data, you can trust the AI. So I'm going to ask you this question because another person by the name of Colton asked the question, how do I trust AI to analyze sensitive data? How do I know that it's safe?
You trust it by reviewing the output of it and have it, again, reflect the reality of what you want the feedback to be.
So really that gets back to the answer that we talked about, which is it augments human judgment, does not replace human judgment, and nor should these things be sent out into the wild without the review of a human being.
Yeah, well, it's the earlier point that I made, John. When you're using a public model, it's learning all kinds of things, and it could be learning things that aren't correct. One of the big early on arguments around ChatGPT was somebody went in and asked it to provide some positive feedback on why they should, want Joe Biden versus Donald Trump for president. And it came back with nothing on Donald Trump and a bunch of positive things on Joe Biden. So someone had taught it to, act like it was more Democratic than it was Republican. And that was a really big deal. And that wasn't OpenAI doing that. That was people, it was based on the questions it was asking to ChatGPT and what it was learning. And so to your point, it is secure. I mean, the data is secure. So, that no one's going to be able to see what you have interacted with ChatGPT, but it's depending on what it's going to learn or not learn, you need to make sure that it's reflecting the reality of what you want it to reflect.
How do we take there's this question by Doug Fletcher, and the question is around responsibility, though. So if AI does get it wrong, if there's bias built into the model, who's accountable for that?
There's many lawsuits already being filed against people. I'm saying very close to this, even with my own law firm, because we want to make sure that we are doing this in a very responsible way. Where it tends to go wrong is, is people will write scripts or books and it'll copy somebody else's book, and you'll get sued because you have a license to that information. So you do have to be careful. What I tell my organization is, I want you to use it as much as you possibly can, but you have to use judgment, and you have to be careful that you think about what is the results of what you're doing with the product, especially when we ask it to do things like content creation, to make sure that it's not using somebody else's content that's protected by law.
I think this theme that keeps on coming up about human oversight, judgment, and appreciating and using AI for what it is, but not for what it isn't, is really important. I tend to find when we, just more broadly speaking as an HR professional, when we make change, people see it as like binary of, you are introducing this entirely new thing that's going to change the way in which we operate A, B, and C. The truth is, this is just a tool that's going to augment our jobs, our judgment, change the way that we work, I think mostly for the better, but it's just a tool, and it's not always going to be perfect nor right. We need to do our diligence. I see in the chat, people talking about auditing. We need to do auditing. We need to apply judgment, both organizational judgment and obviously individual judgment. And if we do that, I think we'll have a much more productive route to using this tool effectively. But if people just take what comes out and they're lazy, they just take what's out, hit publish, or do what it says that they should do, we're not going to have the right outcomes.
But the positives of AI far, far outweigh the potential negatives. I think the innovation in this, and John showed this at the beginning, it was the fastest technology to 100 million people ever. It did it in a couple of months. And it is going to profoundly change the way that people work, the way that they innovate. It's going to be across all functions inside of a company. This isn't just, HR. I mean, our company's using it. It's helping to write code for us. It's helping to debug code. It's writing scripts for, qualifying the code. It's creating content, that's relevant about what we do. And so it's a really, really important technology. And I would encourage everyone to, embrace it and learn and understand, especially as HR professionals, you work with your leadership to come up with your own, language around how you're going to use AI, and then how you talk about it externally, how you're going to protect people that use it, and have models for what your expectations are for people internally, because they're using it already, and you probably want to put some guidelines in guideposts around what the use for is in AI is internally. And are you going to pay for people to pay for ChatGPT 4.0 versus 3.5, which is free? So I'd encourage you to get your heads around this technology, because it's not going away. And the fear that I had a year ago about it, I fear much less a year later after being intimately involved with it for 12 months now. And I think that's true of people that have been experimenting with it. You'll find that to be true as well.
Are there any parallels to we've faced these types of things in the workplace before, maybe not the adoption levels that have happened here as fast, but when you think about things like the introduction of the internet, the introduction of social media, we have, I think there's been
smartphones.
There time and again, we go to this more of a compliance nature where we want to clamp down on them, but then we find that clamping down doesn't necessarily, you have to work with them, not against them, essentially, because when something changes fundamentally how human beings are interacting with technology, it's pretty hard for the workplace to actually control those experiences to that extent. Do you see those parallels? Do you see how maybe HR leadership takes a different posture this time around versus maybe how social media was handled in early days?
David, I'm sure you had more than most, being in the financial industry, trying to be forward, but yet being told you can't be because of all these nervousnesses around the financial industry. I've witnessed, I'm an ex-Cisco executive, and I was intimate in building of the web for many years, and the resistance in the financial institutions was probably the most difficult companies that wanted to innovate but felt really restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, John, I think you summed it up incredibly well in terms of like the history and the adoption. And Doug, it's true. And when you think about, there are some very important reasons for some of that hesitation, including regulatory requirements and various legal requirements. So I'd say yes. I think the issue that we're going to experience probably faster than we have with the introduction of other technologies is I think AI, as people figure out how extraordinarily helpful it can be to them, will start to use it on their own. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to avoid for, many of the reasons that we've talked about.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. So we are on question number 6 here. AI is not transparent. So we're talking about the question of transparency, the notion of it being a black box. How do we address that?
Again, transparency is in the eye of the beholder again. John, I mean, a lot of these questions in my mind fall back onto the judgment question again. It is a bit of a black box. It's learning from all sources, and it's basically technology that now mimics the brain. Every point in the network of ChatGPT is training every other point in the network on anything that's new. And so the ability to learn at a pace that far exceeds, what we can do as humans is there. And that's the fear of it as well. But, again, it's the output that you need to look at and provide judgment to.
can I add to that? In addition to the output, one thing that I have enjoyed doing is asking the AI to explain how it came to a conclusion and how it's thinking itself. I know it's not really thinking, but how it is taking the data and the prompts and turning that into a recommendation or an answer. You can ask ChatGPT or whatever AI to explain to you how it came up with that response. And for me, that's part of like the auditing process and the judgment. And you can also then help shape it and steer it as well. I also just want to give a shout out for all the great questions that are coming in. Please keep them coming because we really want this to be conversational.
There are, and there is, and I think Michelle just answered one other point about, which is there are sources. I think that these tools are being more and more expected to actually allow you to audit down into where the source of the information comes from in the first place. So I think that has a lot to do with trust as well, with the transparency question.
And the regulations are requiring us to audit independently and report outcomes as well.
Yeah. We did get a great question in from Lauren, comment and question. So my fear is the perception will be that someone is cheating or is lazy. Oh wow, the question, did it just pop up in the whole screen there? Because they are using ChatGPT versus traditional methods for performance reviews, building strategy. Additionally, what are your thoughts on AI having negative impact on how we as humans function if we're no longer required to use our brain to solve problems? Great question, Lauren.
Smiling as this question came through. It's a great question. And actually, I've been using AI as a writing coach. I take a lot of pride in my writing. I think I'm a generally good writer, but I got to say, like when I write something and then ask AI to polish it, to give me feedback, man, it's amazing how much it's really good. And I also sometimes feel like initially I felt like I was like, am I plagiarizing? Am I cheating? I don't know what, like, I have this funny feeling, but the truth is like before that, I would share my writing with others and ask for their feedback. I would definitely use other resources available to me to come up with ideas. I guess maybe the question is like, did we feel like we were cheating when word processors came out? We didn't have to type anymore. iPhones came out. I had the same feeling, and maybe I still have it a little bit, but the truth is like this is part of our new operating system, and a lot of people are going to be using it. And I think if we can put those feelings aside for a moment and embrace the tools available, but still keep our own voice, I think that's so important for us to keep our own voice. I think my vote is it's not plagiarizing.
Well, and I think, Lauren, we're going to start to innovate in ways we've never thought about because we have this technology, and it's going to free our minds. It's going to help our minds to go to places our minds might not otherwise go. I have an example, David, of the writing thing. So, I have somebody that works for me who has a child that wanted to get into a school that one of my kids went to that's a private school, and asked me if I would write a letter of reference for his daughter. And I used ChatGPT to help me do that. And I sent it to the principal of the school, who I had gotten to know well because I had put multiple kids through this school. And in 5 minutes, he called this person and said, "Welcome to the school," because the letter was so well written. And I wrote him back and said, "I don't know if this letter had anything to do with this, but thank you. They're very excited about being able to be part of the family." He said, 100% this letter impacted me. And so, wow. Just an example of, what the power of this technology. And by the way, David, I couldn't have come up with that letter. No way I could have written it as eloquently as ChatGPT did.
Well, maybe other people had better teachers than I did, but I remember back in the day when I asked my teachers to write recommendation letters, oftentimes they would tell me to write a draft and they would sign it. So maybe there's just a more modern version of that.
Well, and Lauren, the other thing that people ask about, kids going to college and in school and using ChatGPT to do their work. Well, now there's technology that teachers are using that can access whether or not what they receive from a student was written by AI. And so it's going to be an interesting battle inside of colleges. And the other example that ChatGPT said is The 100 million users dropped off by 40% when summer hit last year, when kids went home, weren't in school. I mean, so one of the biggest uses of ChatGPT was in school. So.
I think Wendy had a great comment as well, and I think it gets to the heart of why we do these people fundamental webinars in the first place, which is the notion of HR being able to take a more of a assertive leadership position in how these things happen. And I think we've hit on some points. I'd love to just call it out and see if you have any additional commentary. But I think as HR professionals, we have a huge opportunity to lead the way by embracing AI. It can help us show up more strategically. We can help the organization assess the risks and be advisors and lead through this change. I, for one, am super excited about how it can enhance what we do day to day and look at the unknowns as the opportunity to problem solve.
So, one example I would give you that I found fascinating. So prior to, being a CEO, I ran a large organization at Cisco Systems. I had 6,000 people working for me, and I had an HR business partner. And, I used to watch this. I had multiple. This happened to be a woman. And some of the things that she had to go try and do, which she was the police and just, forcing people to try to do the work that they actually needed to do, or answering really silly questions and not working on things that we wanted to do more strategically. So I went in and asked ChatGPT. I said, I'm getting ready as a leader to have a conversation with somebody who people find difficult, that don't listen, that always have the last thing to say. Can you give me some guidelines on how I should have this conversation? And it, in 30 seconds, put a 10-point plan in place that said, here's how you should lead this conversation. Start here, do this next, then do this, and then measure these results and come back a week later. I mean, it was eloquent. And so how important would that be if you could just teach your organization to use ChatGPT to be your HR ask bot and let you focus on more strategic efforts inside the organization?
There's so many examples that come to mind now that I want to explore, but I'll just pick one, which is think about performance calibration conversations and talent reviews in organizations. And first of all the work and data that goes into preparing for those conversations, but also the subjectivity that you sometimes see in the room and decisions being made, perhaps without a full suite of data. When you think about the ability for AI to help prepare people for those conversations in a much more objective, fact-based way, for AI to actually, it's going to happen, participate in some of those conversations, ask the right questions, give the right prompts, push back at times to make sure that we're taking a more holistic and less biased view, I think it's going to be a real game changer in that, and probably every other example across HR, but I'm going to pick that one as the example.
So David, we thank you for a lead in on, let me talk a little bit about Betterworks, but one of the things that we will be shipping in the next quarter is the ability for you to have when you go in, both for calibration and when you go in for those of you, and many of you are still doing annual performance reviews. We like to think quarterly is better and more lightweight, but we now can spit out an annual review process for you, which is an outline of the body of work of that person. So you're looking at the body of work when you're providing the feedback that you want to use to give them. And then AI is looking at that body of work and actually helping you write the feedback to give that person that's reducing bias. And again, it's actionable insights. It's something they can actually go do something with. And so that technology is already there, David.
And it's going to make a tremendous difference in our experience at work and the quality of our decision making.
Well, and it's going to help you to give feedback on not what you remember, but looking at what were their goals? How did they achieve their goals? What feedback did they get? What have they been hearing from their peers? It's all going to be right there for you to look at while you're providing that feedback.
Karen made a great comment. I agree with the comments before. The world is moving and changing at such a fast pace. It's a good tool to use to get initial solutions to our problems, leaving room for us to concentrate on a more strategic and planning mindset. Also, the world of work expects us to contribute and provide solutions rapidly.
Yeah, again, going back, I'd encourage you to really come up with some crazy questions to ask ChatGPT in the prompt, and you'll be amazed what it can come up with. help me be a better HR business partner to this person who I'm working with right now, who has the following qualities. You'll be amazed at the answer it will give you on how to work with a person.
Great question from Michelle here. I think this is flipping more to the side of like, where are companies at in this broader journey right now? And she asks, are companies considering integrating AI into the HR technology stack today? So, this has taken the world by storm. We're a year in, and so maybe the two of you can comment on what you sort of see from like the adoption side of the equation.
Every HR vendor in the world right now is trying to figure out how to use AI inside of their products in a meaningful way. I've seen announcements from, Workday, SAP, SuccessFactors, which I'm the ex-president of, and every other vendor. Now, there's really two ways it's happening. It's going to be more difficult for existing firms that have, very large technology stacks to figure out how to use AI. And then there are HR companies that are being born of AI. So they never didn't exist, and they only exist because they're using AI to reinvent things inside of HR. We are certainly thinking about it in every possible way. And what we're doing inside of our own product, we're saying, where can we use AI as a painkiller versus a vitamin? Where is a pain point that exists for you? I foresee this making this process, it's really hard. People hate doing it. People hate receiving it, into something that is quick, easy, adds value. People see value in it. It's actually something that the individual contributor goes, wow, this is meaningful feedback for me. I can do something with this, and making managers better managers. We can look at the interactions between a manager and their direct reports and nudge them, saying, hey, you haven't talked to Sally or Bob about their goals in 2 weeks. You probably should. And it looks like they're having difficulty achieving one of those goals. You should reach out and have this conversation. We're looking at that kind of technology inside of our application to make managers better. We can ultimately learn what are the qualities of a manager in your organization that tends to have people that are highly productive that work for them, and what are the qualities of the managers that aren't. And how can you go help coach up those managers that need more training and or move them into a new job?
I want to double click into two of the points that Doug just made. The first one, I like how you talked about painkiller versus vitamin. There are 267 people in this virtual room. Raise your hand if you've heard from anybody in your organization, I hate writing performance reviews, or some kind of disparaging remark. I mean, I ran performance reviews for a long time. Sometimes I didn't tell people I did that because I didn't want to hear about how much they dislike it. So like, think about a universe in which people can have preceded really high quality feedback for them to then invest their time and their mental energy on adding their own context, making it better, applying their own judgment, but having so much of the parts that they don't like stripped away. That to me is I would love to see the faces of the tens of thousands of people when you roll it out to an organization, and how different their experience will be by removing such a painful part of their experience, and therefore making the other parts that actually matter so much better. The other point, Doug, that I want to dig in on, this is more on the vitamin side, is, and you started to touch on this, is making managers so much better at their jobs. Managers, let's just assume good intent, want to do well at their jobs, but they have a lot going on. And Doug, I know like you and I have talked about how much of a recognition culture that you have, but managers don't always have the time to know what to recognize. And this idea of like prompting managers every Friday, hey, John's been working especially hard this week. You should just say thank you. And here's 3 things that John's doing that you can say thank you for. That's going to create more empathetic and ironically more human interactions in the workplace as managers kind of evolve to be able to do what they've always wanted to do, let's say, but didn't have the time or the resources to prepare for those things or to know when to do them.
I saw a question there, John, from Beth asking how can she access ChatGPT if her company doesn't have it or allow it? Well, there's a mobile version of it, Beth. So you can, and you can use your voice to interact with ChatGPT in terms of the prompt and asking a question. So if you have your own, smart device not issued by work and not controlling your phone, then you can do it that way. Maybe if they restrict access on your laptop. And many of the AI companies are coming out with mobile versions of their product.
Right. I'm going to move us to the last question here, and it's around the complexity, the concern around the complexity of learning how to use these tools. And I think I'll go all the way back to a comment that, Doug, you made very early on. I think you said it's not going to replace humans it will replace humans that don't have the AI skills, essentially. I believe, if I got that right, that people will need to have skills to use AI. And when we talk about larger global corporations with a very diverse workforce, what are the concerns around complexity and how you make it easily available and easy to use for everybody?
Yeah, there are already places where you can go to learn how to use AI. And you can even do it by job function. As a programmer, you can learn to use AI to write code and debug code. And so the classes are taught by OpenAI. If you go to the OpenAI website, they teach people how to use AI, and many of these are free. So I would just, I'd go ask ChatGPT, how do I learn how to interact with ChatGPT? And I think David said he actually did that. Or Google it, and you'll come up with a bunch of classes that will be offered to you based on your function and how to use AI in your role.
I'll just add a few thoughts from my own experience. First of all, I think as HR professionals, we have to help drive the change to enable people to embrace AI in the workplace. I think we need to both teach people practical skills and also remove some of the fear factor around it by getting them starting the ball rolling. And I'll just share one personal way that I've done this, both in my professional and personal life. When I've had somebody, and this happens almost daily, say that they haven't used ChatGPT yet, don't know how to get started, etc., I will take my phone out, and I have the mobile version of GPT-4, and I'll engage the voice feature because it's easy to talk to. And I'll just say, think of a problem that you're struggling with professionally or personally. Let's have a conversation with ChatGPT. And almost every time that person's jaw drops, they download it, they start to play with it, they want to explore. I'd actually love to do that in the workplace. Let's have a panel discussion where we take a really good example of something that managers, leaders, employees are either struggling with, need to come up with a new strategy, need to think about the goal setting process, and let's inject AI into that and let people observe what it can do, and then teach them, how do you create effective prompts? What are the different use cases? I think there's a lot of aha moments where people don't naturally think I can use AI for this, just because we're obviously not programmed to do that yet, given how new it is. But as you start to expand people's mindsets about how good it is, so they want to use it, how to get the most out of it through effective prompts, and then a creative mindset around the different ways in which you can engage. I think those three things are the recipe for both disarming the fear and then getting people interested in learning, but also then supporting them as HR professionals, supporting them in the organization to actually accelerate that learning and take it to the next level.
So I'd encourage people to do a couple of things. There's a website called There's an AI for That. And so there's an AIforthat.com. When my poor company, and John will smile when I say this, I send new AI company information to everybody in my company on the daily. If you go to Google or to ChatGPT and say, what are the top 5 AI companies that people are using to do SEO, on my website? Or what are the top 5 websites to use in marketing to write content? What are the top 5? You name it. And by in accounting, it's not just ChatGPT and Bard. There are thousands of. John said 100 companies a week are propping up. The amount of venture capital going into AI technology is immense, and zero venture capital is going into companies that are non-AI. It's dried up and gone away, only into AI. So again, I encourage everybody to embrace this in a meaningful way.
I think that's a great place to wrap this, because what you just said, Doug, I mean, it just demonstrates leadership, right? You're in the tools, you're even looking at the websites that suggest the tools, and you're sharing them with other people. And I think that's, the mindset of looking forward into what this is going to be and how it's going to be. When we talk about complexity, we talk about the worries around it. If you don't experience them, you're going to always have that uncertainty or fear around them, and understanding them is going to be obtained by using them yourselves.